Good morning and welcome to the Hillsborough MPO Metropolitan Planning for Transportation Committee. This is a virtual meeting of the Policy Committee for March, and we have a very rigorous agenda, and I'm looking forward to seeing the presentations today. But with that, we'll call this meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I kind of like that collage of the pledge. With that, we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Kemp,
Here.
Councilman Maniscalco,
here.
Joe Wagner,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Overman,
Here.
Paul Anderson, or Charles Klug, and Commissioner Cohen is out on medical leave. Are there any other MPO board members who are in attendance and aren't part of the policy committee?
Derek Dowdy.
Okay.
I believe I saw Miss Williams as well.
Yes, I did too.
All right, thank you for attending, and you're welcome to participate in our discussion today.
Great. With that, we will not be doing the minutes since this is a totally virtual meeting without an in-person quorum. And we will move to public comment. And I assume we have at least one because I saw that I heard Chris Villa join the meeting. So we'll start with public comment, 3 minutes per speaker, please.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So I wanted to bring up something important. I don't know, maybe like 2 sessions ago with the policy committee, I mentioned that I was concerned about having special interest voting on the MPO, that we need better representation. And I'm going to talk about quickly a project that's in a PD&E phase. It's actually running from downtown to like Gandy, and it's by the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. They are seeking to double the capacity of vehicles on this roadway. And while that might not mean much, especially if they're within the right of way, they're actually going to dump more cars at the exits at Beta Bay, and also any other exits that do interface with the crosstown. There's also future modifications where they're going to increase and reconfigure the expressway entry and exit ramps in downtown, which is greatly going to impact any type of walkability. And then, of course, you have Vision Zero issues at Beta Bay and also on Bayshore as well. So what VIA is doing practically is turning on the spigot for no reason. It isn't a road that I see much gridlock on. I mean, yeah, it does get a little peak action, but, you know, probably 22 hours of the day, 23, it's virtually like empty. So I'm very concerned about that because we have a member, and no like disrespect to Joe Wagner, but you know, he sits on that board, and I would imagine he would want to support a highway system linking to that one to make toll revenue. The other problem, and I wish I could be there to show you visuals, is that the I-4 connector does right now connect to I-4 in the crosstown, and so what happens is turning on that spigot will eventually increase the size of that intersection where the connector hits I-4. The reason why this is a big deal is simple. We're going to cross that road again where the DTI is inefficient. We're also going to cross that road again. We're going to have to look at increasing capacity right in the heart of East Tampa and Ybor City. A lot of this stuff has domino effects, and it's quite terrifying. But I'm going to wrap up with one thing. There's a Senate Bill 1660 and House Bill 1283. And it's seeking to name VIA as the West Florida Expressway Authority. If you thought Barber was bad, this is going to grow into a multi-county transportation authority. So we're going to lose a lot of local representation. And let me remind you folks that when the crosstown was placed, it went through an area called the Garrison, and also went through Dobyville. Dobyville and the Garrison were African-American neighborhoods. In particular with Dobyville, we had downzoning that occurred in there where they downzoned it to industrial use. This allowed roads and anything bad to kind of come through there. So it's when you downzone, it's like red lighting. You know, you make the properties low in value, and then you make it easier to literally get into a slum where the highway system just can bulldoze it and go right over that neighborhood. So you have another case here, not just with TV Next, but with this crosstown project that hopefully you'll learn with the presentation that it does have a racist past. So please do what you can. I hope the MPO board will deny this project if there's some level of coordination. And, you know, talk to Thea about this and have that conversation. Send Dana and Josh over there to educate them about our horrible past. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else at public comment?
We do not have anybody else signed up.
Okay. I'd like to just assure Mr. Vella, at least on my part, that I think that this does need to be something that the MPO takes up in the future as a future item. And so perhaps that new business, would that be appropriate, Ms. Alden?
Sure. If you'd like to ask us to request that the Expressway Authority give us a presentation, we can certainly do that. That does not need to be a board action.
Right. Okay. And actually that, and I mean, I think Mr. Vella it would be good to have a balanced presentation just with all the considerations, because I find too often we get just what is, shown as a project. And this, again, with all due respect to Mr. Wagner, I just really do feel like this is, as Mr. Vella said, something that we should at least be knowledgeable in the full spectrum. And I think we need to have the kind of other side of it as well that Mr. Vella said. So I'd like to make that opportunity for that as well within that. But with that being said, and maybe we could talk about that after, I just wanted to make sure about whether it needed to be brought up at new business or not. Well, I'll bring it up then. But I didn't know if Mr. Vella was going to be on the whole time. He might be, because this is such an interesting presentation right up his alley. So with that, we'll end that and we'll move to our discussion items. And I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Alden, to introduce the item.
Thank you so much. We have an update this year of the MPO non-discrimination plan. And last summer, our board passed a resolution against discrimination and asked us to look at the history of transportation planning and how that has played a role. And so today we're having an interim discussion about the work so far on the non-discrimination plan. We do not have a draft of the plan to bring to you today, although our previous plan is posted on our website. Today we are just moving forward some of the work that has been done so far that we to share with you and to hopefully get your feedback on how you'd like to see this inform the MPO's work in the future. And so we have two presentations today by staff. The first will be by Joshua Barber, who will go over his review of the history of transportation and community planning, particularly in the first half of the 20th century. And then Dana Lazarus will be giving us a report on the public engagement that she's conducted so far to help us develop our non-discrimination plan update this year.
Can I say something? We're getting a lot of feedback from the HTV side, I believe.
Huh.
So, everybody's muted, that'd be great, but it just seems like Ms. Alden got interrupted many times with some kind of background noise. So just bring somebody's attention.
Okay, because I didn't hear a thing on my end, but yeah, if everyone could stay muted, and thanks for pointing that out.
Are you ready, everyone? All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Josh Barber, MPO staff. Thank you for the opportunity today to present. We're going to go over, as Beth said, our update of our Title VI and non-discrimination plan. Next slide. So I'll give you a little bit of project background. Our last non-discrimination plan was adopted by the MPO board in March of 2018. And the intent of the plan is to really demonstrate our compliance with major federal civil rights legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, specifically Title VI of that, the ADA, and other major civil rights legislation. The best practice is to update this every 3 years. So that puts our update cycle this year. And we try to advance equitable processes, programs, and policies for the entire agency throughout the plan. The 2018 plan covers the following areas. It identifies our underserved communities and where they're located, such as minority communities, low income, folks with disabilities, and so on. We provide an overview of how we engage those communities in our work, how we evaluate the equity outcomes of our plans, whether that's through GIS or other means. We do a self-evaluation of how we integrated Title VI and non-discrimination principles into our primary program areas, such as the TIP, the LRTP, the Unified Planning Program, BICPED, etc. And then also, by federal law, we have to have a Title VI complaint process, procedures, and a staff liaison, so that if a member of the community feels they have been discriminated against in the provision of our programs, they have a recourse to that end. And then it also provides a set of recommendations for the agency to move forward. So a big thing this year for the 2021 plan, as part of our executive leadership's commitment to equity, we will be expanding the plan to include the City County Planning Commission, which is why you'll see in our history report an overview of not only transportation, but community planning efforts as well. And then also we really view this as an opportunity to support the racial equity resolution that you all passed last summer. Next slide. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what groups are covered under the various civil rights legislation. As an agency receiving federal funds, we have to ensure the non-discrimination and the provision of all of our activities on the basis of race, ethnicity, color, and national origin, which comes out of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Income, which comes out of the Executive Order on Environmental Justice. Ability, which comes out of the ADA. Sex, gender, and sexual orientation, which you can see in other civil rights legislation. Age comes out of the Age Discrimination Act of 1975, I believe. English proficiency, so there's an executive order on providing access to limited English proficient populations that was passed in, or ordered in the early 2000s, as well as family status and religion. And these are all areas where if someone feels they have been discriminated against in regards to this, they are able to move forward with a complaint. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over our scope of work. These are kind of our major tasks that we identified early on in the process. And I'm going to be going over task 2, the history of inequity in our planning processes in our community. And then Dana will be talking about task 3, our community mapping process, as well as task 5, our community engagement efforts for this task, or for this project. Next slide, Beth. And so we're going to dive a bit into the history of discriminatory and racist planning in Hillsborough County. This is a major component of our equity work this year. And on a fundamental level, from our local governments to our federal government, our country, I think, has really failed to address the legacy of racism. Nearly 60 years have passed since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and in many ways, inequity hasn't changed. Non-discrimination legislation has not resulted in a post-racial society. And while many of us know the general history of urban renewal, of highway construction, we likely know about exclusionary zoning, the Homeowners Loan Corporation. I think there's less awareness about how these policies manifested themselves in Hillsborough County specifically. But as we seek to create a more just and equitable society and community, governments and government agencies have a responsibility and an obligation in documenting and acknowledging the specific and intentional ways in which past policies altered and shaped our communities. And there truly cannot be justice without public acknowledgement of the specific ways planning in our community has harmed Black people and other people of color, and a public process to discuss those policies, explore how they relate to current challenges our community faces, and a visioning process for how to overcome those challenges. Next slide. So I'm going to go over how planning got us here. We're going to kind of review local, state, and national politics at the time to provide a bit of a background and a context. We'll talk a bit about public and private housing, such as the Housing Authority, mortgage lending, etc. We'll go over a bit on comprehensive planning and zoning, so the first comp plans for the city and the county, as well as we'll go through urban renewal and highway construction a bit as well. Next slide. So I want to provide a bit of a disclaimer and a content warning before we dive in here. I provided extensive quotes and images from historical documents, which uses language and depictions which are bigoted, inappropriate, and insensitive by today's standards. I will not be reading these quotes verbatim, but I will be providing some background about them and an overview of the plans themselves. But I provided this because it's important for us to all understand the specific and intentional language that was used at the time, and so that we don't mince words about what the explicit intent of these policies were. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go a bit over, like I said, local, state, national politics at the time to kind of set the stage for us. So during the Reconstruction period, post the Civil War, we had 2 African Americans elected on Tampa City Council, one in 1869 and one in 1876. And then we also had 5 African Americans elected to the County Commission of Hillsborough County during that period. With the end of Reconstruction and the Compromise of 1877, the Republican Party and federal troops pulled out of the South, and the Democratic Party regained control of the state of Florida and continued to rule supreme for many years after. In 1887, a Black city council member was elected for the first time since Reconstruction. That was Joseph A. Walker. He was backed by the Knights of Labor, which was a statewide organization that became a political force for African Americans running for office throughout the state of Florida. And in response to this and the growth of this organization, the Florida State Legislature enacted a poll tax in 1889. In 1896, the legality of segregation was confirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States in Plessy v. Ferguson, which was less than a decade after the poll tax in Florida. The article from a newspaper on the right discusses the implementation of segregation on a Tico streetcar, and it mentions it was met with resistance by the Black community at the time. As Jim Crow continued to grow throughout the South, the Florida Democratic Party declared that only whites could hold party membership in 1902. And then shortly after this, when the Florida State Democratic Party declared this in 1902, it forced Black voters to register as Republican. And coupled with the poll tax, this effectively disenfranchised Black people statewide. Next slide. So we're going to get a bit into the local politics, shifting gears to Tampa. A group of white civic leaders established the White Municipal Party in 1908 in response to having an African American almost run for office. The stated goal of the party, as reported in a local newspaper at the time, is quoted to the right. By 1910, the White Municipal Party effectively instituted a whites-only primary rule, and the first whites-only primary was held that same year in the city of Tampa. By 1931, this was implemented statewide by the Florida legislature, and the White Municipal Party was recognized as the only political party in the city of Tampa. From 1910 to 1956, every Tampa mayor was a member of the White Municipal Party, all the way from Donald B. McKay to Curtis Hickson. And it's really against this backdrop that we see the development of the planning profession and the major growth of the development of the counties and the cities of Hillsborough. And as we continue to review these next areas, I want us to keep in mind this political context. Next slide, please. The study was published in 1927 at the request of the Tampa Welfare League, the Tampa Urban League, and the Tampa Young Men's Christian Association. And the purpose was to determine the social needs of the Black community, ascertain the extent to which those needs were being met, and to suggest a basis upon which to build a more effective social program. The report provides extensive statistical data about the Black community in Tampa during that time, and it really helps us kind of frame the changes that are going to occur in the city over the next 50 years through urban renewal, the interstate highway construction, and through the end of Jim Crow. The study reported a number of findings and provides some insight into race relations at the time. The report begins by noting that unlike the rest of the South, 20% of Tampa's population is foreign-born white, that is Spaniard, Italian, Cuban, and that the foreign-born white population are mostly concentrated in Ybor City. And except for the area of Ybor City, where people lived intermixed, irrespective of race, generally the rest of the city was segregated. And that although a few Black people owned homes and others lived in decent rent quarters, the vast majority of Black people resided in congested, cheap rent areas, as they stated at the time. They identify some major neighborhoods that the Black community had. That included Dobyville and West Hyde Park, which was over 10% of the Black population at the time. West Tampa and Roberts City, the West Palm Avenue section, Robles Pond, College Hill, the Garrison, Ybor City, and of course the Central Avenue Business District. The report provides an overview of housing, health, recreation, social services, and employment, and some quotes from these sections are provided here. Ultimately, the report ends with a set of recommendations for the city. It notes that Tampa's most privileged citizens have a responsibility to pursue corrective action for Tampa's less privileged groups, and that solving one of the conditions identified in this report does not immediately solve health and other challenges, and that we must tackle these problems simultaneously, and that addressing one does not discharge our duty to solve all of the others. Next slide, please. I'm going to go over a bit of public and private housing and the provision thereof. The first area I want to discuss is deed restrictions. In the early 1900s, deed restrictions and racially restrictive covenants became an important instrument for enforcing racial segregation across the United States. These are clauses in the deed of a property that allow, that list obligations that purchasers of a property must assume. And it includes stuff like what color the house can be painted, what you can landscape the plants. But for over half of the 20th century, a commonplace clause in many property deeds stated that the property should never be sold or rented to African Americans, and it often included other racial and ethnic minorities as well. In Hillsborough County, staff have found covenants for properties in areas of Ruskin and areas of Seminole Heights. We found reference to them for properties on Davis Island in the Homeowners Loan Corporation data, but we're still working on reviewing historical records to identify other neighborhoods and properties that contain those clauses. And we'll be happy to provide any of those original deeds as well that contain that. I'm going to go a little bit over public housing projects. The first major federal involvement in constructing housing came during World War I. But it wasn't until the 1937 Housing Act that the federal government became heavily involved in providing public housing. The act required local governments to establish their own housing agencies that could build projects with federal grants and loans. And it led to the creation of the Tampa Housing Authority in October of 1937. The subsequent housing acts provided funding for the construction of hundreds of thousands of units across the country. And I want to note that this presentation is a bit Tampa-centric, only because the growth and development of the county was focused on the city primarily in the early 20th century. And there are areas where we have tried to include the rest of the county as well, and we'll get there. So the housing authority for the city was established, City of Tampa was established in 1937. The first project constructed by the authority was North Boulevard Homes, which was first occupied in 1940. We have to know that all public housing built by state, local, and federal funds and their agencies was segregated by race through likely the 1968 Fair Housing Act. For example, North Boulevard Homes was Black only. Robles Park Village, or Lake Avenue Homes, as it was called at the time, was a white only public housing complex. Riverview Terrace on Broad Street in North Seminole Heights was white only. Ponce de Leon Court in Ybor City was identified in the 1942 zoning plan as, quote, occupied wholly by Latins. And the big thing here is that often public housing in Hillsborough County, as well as nationwide, was used to create and reinforce racial and ethnic segregation, whether that was through displacing Black residents in certain areas or concentrating Black residents in other areas. And for example, the Tampa Bay Times, in their history of the Zion Cemetery, stated that the construction of Robles Park Village, or Lake Avenue Homes at the time, displaced many African Americans in that community, and the community, like I said, was white only. The next area I want to cover a little bit is mortgage lending and the Homeowners Loan Corporation.
Joshua, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Could you identify the grade, the definition of the grade that represented the colors? I was trying to read the legend and I could see that there was a grade mentioned, but I didn't understand what that meant.
Yeah, I'm going to get there. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation was established in 1933 under the Roosevelt administration's New Deal. And the creation of this really changed the administration of mortgages and home loans nationwide. It provided, for the first time, long-term, low-interest loans that this corporation helped guarantee. It created a uniform appraisal system nationwide, and it allowed appraisers in one region of the country to speak the same language with appraisers in other regions. And the appraisal standards included characteristics that one would expect, such as housing stock, age, the price range, but it also included characteristics of the householders at the time, such as race, ethnicity, and color of origin. And the methods really reflected the racial prejudice endemic to mid-century America. First neighborhoods were assigned the letter grade of A, which are colored green on the map, and they're the most desirable and stable neighborhoods. Second grade neighborhoods received a B, and those are rendered in blue on the map, and they were identified as still desirable, but perhaps past their peak. Third grade neighborhoods received a letter grade of C, and those are yellow on the map. And these are areas that are past their peak or areas with substandard housing. And the final category, which was assigned the letter D, was color-coded red. And these are neighborhoods that were characterized as blighted, consisted of subpar housing, and were areas where the people who lived there were primarily Black, Jewish, Spanish, and other non-American, as cited in those reports at the time. And in the city of Tampa, you can see the areas that were redlined include East Tampa, West Tampa, Palmetto Beach, Port Tampa, and the report notes at the time that these areas were 95% Black or Latin. And ultimately, these policies really shaped who was able to get a mortgage, where they were able to get a mortgage, and at what interest rate that mortgage was issued. Next slide, please. And did that answer your question, Commissioner Overman?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to kind of dive into comprehensive and planning and zoning. The earliest zoning laws in the United States originated with Los Angeles's zoning ordinance in 1908, the New York zoning ordinance in 1916. From 1910 to 1917, several major U.S. cities enacted zoning laws which restricted neighborhoods on the basis of race. Baltimore was the first such city to enact a racial zoning ordinance in 1910, and that prohibited Black people from buying homes on blocks where whites were a majority and vice versa. These laws were struck down ultimately in 1917 by the Supreme Court. And although explicit racial zoning was banned after this time, many jurisdictions adopted policies and mechanisms that were not explicitly race-based, but were nonetheless used to enforce racial and economic segregation and disproportionately harm racialized and ethnic communities in the US. Examples of these mechanisms include minimum lot sizes, a ban or restriction on multifamily development in primarily white and upper-class neighborhoods, the disparate enforcement of new building codes and standards, and the citing of industrial lands and other undesirable uses in or around racialized and ethnic neighborhoods. Next slide. So we're going to go into the first major plan adopted by the city, the Tampa Major Street Plan, adopted in 1941. And this is the first part of the comprehensive plan for the city. It covers streets and the street system, as well as the rules and regulations for the control of subdivisions. Like most planning studies, it provides an overview of existing conditions and the history. It reviews the growth and history of the city, its subdivisions, its racial makeup. It notes that Tampa is unique among American cities and that has one of the greatest percentages of people of Latin descent, which constituted 29% of the population in 1930. It notes that the black people constitute about 21% of the population. And you can see in the map on the right, neighborhoods that are identified as being primarily African-American include Gobieville, West Tampa, Robles Park, East Tampa, the Garrets. And the plan was really the earliest siting of what would become the interstate highway system in Tampa. And it points to the use of such a roadway system as a means of eliminating blighted areas in the city. That's provided in the quote at the bottom. And you also see explicit racial intent in how the city views primarily Black neighborhoods in the community, where they say these areas act as directives in considering the growth and development of the city. And this language is going to become important as we consider how the city grows moving forward. Next slide, please. So the Tampa zoning plan was adopted in 1942, a year later. At the time, it was only one of 4 cities above 100,000 population that did not yet have a zoning ordinance. It's an extensive ordinance. It includes an overview of the historical context, the legality and authority to zone, the procedures used in developing the plan, characteristics of Tampa's various neighborhoods, including a section entitled Extent and Nature of and Trend of Blight. It provides a review of transportation and transit and other areas. The decision-making behind the zoning of certain districts, as shown in this zoning map, are cited to be primarily existing land use and neighborhood character. There are no racial, ethnic, or class-based justifications cited for the zoning map in the plan, which stands in contrast to many zoning ordinances in the US, but was likely, their attempts to avoid legal challenges to the zoning ordinance. But we cannot divorce this plan from the era in which it was crafted in the political context of the city at the time. And furthermore, if we examine the map shown here, it is readily apparent that the areas identified as primarily Black in the map before are zoned as multifamily. You can see that in East Tampa, you can see that in West Tampa, which were zoned R4, which was the highest multifamily zoning, as well as portions of Tampa Heights and Hyde Park, which were zoned R3, which was slightly lower multifamily density. Most of Tampa and Seminole Heights are zoned single family, R1 or R2. And it's important to note, as Mr. Vela stated earlier, there is the siting of industrial uses immediately adjacent to multifamily housing. You can see that in East Tampa and in West Tampa with the vertical lines. So this points to, as stated, the siting of undesirable uses in primarily Black neighborhoods. Another major section of the plan is the report of an extent of nature and trend of blighted areas. And you can see a directive here with the establishment of North Boulevard Homes in West Tampa, where they state that areas occupied by Black people should be eliminated and those residents be transferred to other areas. And you can really see this explicit racist policy being carried out throughout the rest of the 20th century. Next slide, please, Beth. We're going to go through a little bit of the Tampa Comp Plan. This was adopted in 1945. It covers the areas of Parks and Rec, civic art, civic centers, utilities, and taken in conjunction with the zoning plan and the street plan. It's really the first major comprehensive plan for the city. It makes recommendations for segregated public facilities in West Tampa and the area of 22nd Street and MLK. It also includes a proposal for the establishment of a civic center, which is proposed in, quote, the principal slum area of Tampa, the Scrub. And they describe the Scrub as, quote, an economic barrier to the most healthful, wholesome development of the city. The Scrub is a cancerous infection ripe for a major operation to transform it into something economically sound and worthwhile from a civic standpoint. This proposed site is bound by Central Avenue on the west, Nebraska Avenue on the east, 7th Ave to the north, Cass Street on the south. And they describe this site selection as a selfless undertaking and the location as the source of crimes, immorality, delinquency, and other evil influences. So some very strong language used. Next slide, please. We're going to go a little bit to the east in Plant City. This Plant City's comprehensive development plan was adopted in 1956. It was written by George Simons. It details the history, existing economic and social conditions of the city, existing land uses, the street network, parks and rec, subdivision control, and other areas. One of the first maps in the document shows so-called predominant non-white areas, which is shown in the top here. These areas are south of the Seaboard Railroad tracks on the south side of town, and to the east and the west of the Atlantic coastline tracks as well. And there's a quote provided within the map that describes this. On the topic of Parks and Rec, the city acknowledges that there are no public facilities built for Black people in the city at the time. And it also discusses the creation of a housing authority for the city of Plant City at the time, which received an allocation from the Public Housing Administration. They selected 3 sites for 3 projects, 2 for Black, 1 for white, and the 2 projects for the Black community consisted of 80 units and 60 units respectively, and they were all located on the south side of town, in the southeast corner and the southwest corner. And it states that these projects, when completed, will, quote, eliminate much of the slum and substandard conditions now prevailing south of the tracks. So once again, you see the creation of public housing used as a means of furthering racial segregation across the city. Next slide, please. So we're going to go a little bit into urban renewal, kind of shifting gears. Urban renewal projects across the nation were funded through Title I of the 1949 Federal Housing Act. Through this, areas designated as slums or blighted areas were purchased and property cleared through temporary loans provided by the federal government. Parcels of this land were then sold to private or public developers. Public improvements were made in the area to make it more attractive for development. And ultimately, cities were required to make assurances to the federal government that they would build or provide subsidized public housing on the sites to mitigate the impacts of displacement taking place. Urban renewal in the state of Florida was delayed due to a Supreme Court decision, Florida Supreme Court decision. but special legislation by the legislature enabled Tampa specifically to begin pursuing such funding in the late 1950s, which is why you see a big gap between the enactment of the Federal Housing Act and the start of many projects in the city, in the county. There were 4 projects funded in Hillsborough County. There was the Scrub, or as the federal government called it, Maryland Avenue, the Riverfront Project, Ybor City, as well as Plant City. And I think looking at, if we look at the funded projects in light of the previous plans, you'll see that the city is really carrying out their directives contained in the 1940 plans. Next slide, please. We're going to go a bit over the Scrub, or Maryland Avenue. This is a site that at the time was bounded by Scott Street on the north, Nebraska Avenue on the east, Cass Street on the south, and Central Avenue on the west. And it was identified for over a decade for redevelopment by city authorities. As stated in the 1942 zoning plan, there was a lot of very strong language about how city authorities felt about this area. It was a 60-acre site with 376 families living on it. By the time that demolition started in 1962, there was no housing developer selected to replace the demolished units. By 1963, only 21 of the 106 families that were looking for relocation services had been housed, and 8 of them were relocated to substandard housing. It wasn't until 1966, 4 years later, that a builder was designated to construct low-income housing at the site. These would become Tampa Park Apartments, which, as we all know, is up for redevelopment currently. The Tampa branch of the NAACP raised many concerns about this project throughout its life. Most significantly, the agency criticized the city's desire to reestablish that neighborhood as Black only, and also significantly criticized the lack of community representation on the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Urban Renewal Agency, which consisted of white people only. And these complaints were eventually raised all the way up to the level of the federal government. And it's important to note that this is 1962, so Brown versus Board of Education was already ruled upon in 1958, which ended segregation in public facilities, at least for schools. So the continuation of racially segregated housing in the city continued to be pushed well after Brown versus Board of Education. Robert Saunders, in a letter written to another member of the NAACP, stated that if this project continues as it is currently going, that Black people in Tampa will be relegated to a continuous pattern of racially segregated housing for the next 50 to 100 years. Next slide, please. The riverfront area. This was an urban renewal project funded in 1963. The map on the right shows the location of the project. Pointing, if you're going left, that is north. And you can see the North Boulevard, the crux of the Hillsborough River right there, and North Boulevard Bridge, just to kind of orient you. A 1961 survey showed that this area had 10 white families, 670 Black families, 97 of which were owner-occupied, 176 businesses, and 6 institutions. And this was the area known at the time as Roberts City. So as part of the redevelopment, the University of Tampa purchased 25 acres on the west bank of the Hillsborough River for the expansion of their campus. This was never constructed. It was ultimately sold to another private party without any development occurring, and is now the site of Tampa Preparatory School. In addition to this, the city of Tampa purchased a little over 3 acres just to the north of what is now what was Curtis Hickson Convention Center, which now houses John F. German Library, as well as 5 acres for the construction of a cultural center. Other land was sold off to private entities for the construction of offices, hotels, and other commercial uses. And other land was devoted to the construction of the interstate highway system, which was I-4 at the time, as shown in this map on the bottom. And while the city made assurances to the federal government that subsidized public housing would be built on the site to accommodate those displaced by the project, it took many years for some to be built, and not nearly enough units were constructed to accommodate those who were displaced. Some subsidized housing was eventually built on the site. That included Presbyterian Village, as well as Oakhurst Square apartments, which were built during the same period. And next slide. So the Ybor City Urban Renewal Project was funded in 1964. Over 900 buildings were identified through this project. 708 of those buildings were identified for demolition, and 193 were rehabilitated. Most of the land was then sold for private development. Work began in 1966, and the city, the Urban Renewal Agency, and other organizations were really expecting to have a significant redevelopment occur in Ybor City as a result of this project. And this really never materialized. By mid-1968, the Urban Renewal Agency and the city were negotiating with Hillsborough Community College to purchase urban renewal land and open another campus for the college. And in the early 1970s, over 50 acres of urban renewal land was sold to HCC, who became the largest landowner in the urban renewal area. Other public facilities were constructed on this, including the county's Sheriff Operations Center. The demolition of these properties were mostly residential, and it really led to the continued displacement of residents, which was already occurring as a result of the construction of Interstate 4. Several social service organizations at the time expressed concerns about the availability of housing for elderly Latino residents, and as well as the lack of residents to support businesses and other challenges. Ultimately, around 99 subsidized units were built by several Latin professional and business organizations in the late 1960s. And these were really the only units that were built to replace housing stock lost during the renewal area. Next slide, please. So we're going to go a little bit over highway construction. This is kind of the last major section. The 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act provided funding for the construction of interstate highway systems throughout the United States. And Tampa was unique in that it was situated at the intersection of two designated interstate highways. In addition to the primary interstates built throughout the area, Interstate 4 and what would become Interstate 275, the Crosstown Expressway was also constructed in the 1970s. And most significantly, the construction of Interstate 4 would result in significant displacement of largely Black Latino residents in West Tampa, the Scrub, and Ybor City. And as we saw in the 1942 zoning plan for the city of Tampa, there was a specific intent to use the construction of highways in the city to clear out the neighborhood of the Scrub. And this could also be extrapolated as well as to Dobyville, West Tampa and Roberts City, as well as the Garrison area. And so there's some slides here from the, next slide, please. There's some images from the Master Highway Transportation Plan for the city that was developed in 1957. This is the final zoning of the interstate highway system. This map shows on the left is Armenia Avenue, and to the right is North Boulevard. And you can see the sighting of the interstate highway right on top of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. This is from the same document showing the downtown interchange area. And as well as the what is now Malfunction Junction. Next slide, please. And then this is the map through Ybor City with Nebraska Avenue on the left extent and 22nd Street on the right extent. Next slide, please. And so a little bit of what we see by the end of the 1960s. This is going to be my wrap up. In Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, He stated that the federal government, through major legislation and programs throughout the 20th century, sought to, quote, persuade as many white families as possible to move from urban apartments to single-family suburban homes. Following the process of suburbanization, the federal government, with assistance by local authorities across the U.S., quote, with explicit racial intent, made it nearly impossible for African Americans to follow. So I think what we really see by the end of the 1960s is the destruction of several major Black and Latin neighborhoods, including Dobyville, the Garrison, Roberts City, the Scrub, and Ybor City. We see the displacement of these citizens as a means of economic development and highway construction. In the case of the Scrub, the city authorities recognized that this was a very valuable area, and it was in their best interest to redevelop it. We see further segregated neighborhoods across the county. We see the concentration of Black residents in East Tampa, as well as around North Boulevard in West Tampa. We also see the construction of Progress Village at the time as a result of displacement occurring as a result of the interstate highway construction. The NAACP never supported the construction of Progress Village, as it was a segregated facility, as it was a segregated community. It was being marketed as a segregated community. Well after 1958's Brown versus Board of Education. You see the exclusion of Black residents from the housing market and wealth generation, which has had legacy impacts. And we see the exclusion of Black residents from political office as well as from planning efforts. And that really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions about this. I recognize that archives are naturally biased, and I tried to cover as much material as I could, but I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah, I see several people with questions up, and I just I think it was a incredible presentation. I just want to say before I recognize people, and I'm sure everybody learned a lot. And Commissioner Maniscalco, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barber, that was one of the most fascinating presentations I've ever seen regarding what is, truly a racist past in this community when it comes to anything from construction of the interstate to urban renewal to destruction of so many neighborhoods. It's interesting that you brought up the white municipal party and how it ends with Curtis Sixon. And it only really ended because he died in office in 1956. He had served, I think, at that point, 13 years. But had he lived, that would have continued, the white municipal party. And he was replaced by interim mayors and then finally by Nick Nucio, who was considered the first Latin mayor. But what's interesting is I've thought about my time as an elected official and starting in 2015, and I've always voted against what was called TBX and then TB Next, and I'm glad that I did. And I never say that I'm proud of myself, but I think I'm most proud of those votes because those were a continuation of this racist past, as you've seen with the destruction of neighborhoods through the interstates and the highways being built right through these communities, with the erasure of Roberts City and Dobyville and the Scrub and all these other neighborhoods, that I now understand from this point of view, seeing it on this PowerPoint presentation, as you've shown, why people don't trust politicians. Not all politicians are bad. There are many, many wonderful public servants, but if you look back at the last 100+ years, it's a failure by our predecessors in many, many ways, where this was demolished, this was destroyed, this neighborhood was wiped out, and they did not make good on their promises, saying we're doing this because we're going to provide something better. Because in many instances, as you've shown here, something better never came about. Communities were destroyed and people were pushed out of neighborhoods. And you look at the beautiful and rich history of our city, but it seems that after Reconstruction and with some of the first elected Black officials, you go into this deep segregation, this deep racism to fortify, the control of people that are not of color. And that's why you see city council members being elected that were black at the end of the 1800s. And then for many, many, many years, it's an all-white board. Tampa City Council didn't have the first woman on the board until 1971. And then it was again in the 1970s that we had a black elected official. But there was that gap of 70, 80 years where through the segregation and through these racist policies, people of color were pushed out. And it's a shame. And I think that everybody, not just elected officials, but the presentation that you've shown should be shown to everybody in the city of Tampa so they understand. It's not, well, look at the developments in Water Street and look at, the Riverwalk is a wonderful thing, and look at the growth in the Encore, look at Ybor City. Remember what used to be there, because essentially it's history that has been wiped out. And other than photographs, other than reading in books, or even in this presentation, if people didn't learn about that, they wouldn't know that these communities ever existed. So I'll stop there. I'm usually very quiet, but this really gets my blood boiling. And I'm glad that you presented this to us today. You've shown facts, you've shown proof. And I sincerely appreciate it, because I know a lot of work has to go into this, gathering all this data. You did an amazing job, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember.
And I'll recognize, and it was just so powerful, and I'm not surprised by Councilman Maniscalco's remarks. Truly a person who's followed our history so well. And I agree with you too, that this should be shown in every high school, every middle school in the city, as well as all the adults. It just seems like an incredible historical presentation. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Barber, for making this presentation. What we've heard is valuable information, and I would like to request that this presentation be provided to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Board of County Commission. I think it would be, as we launch, which is going out probably very soon, Hillsborough County's equity profile work on adopting and analyzing our policies that have either exacerbated or created inequities within our community. This research is a core element of it. The study of Reconstruction history lends itself to all the things that you've described in this particular circumstance, and is actually not a surprise, but it's a history we tend to wipe away. And I think bringing it back to the conversation when we are adopting policies, clearly there is a link between transportation planning and affordable housing strategies and policies, and the public's investment in communities. You mentioned in the report that while there was a desire to redevelop certain areas, it didn't happen because the money wouldn't go there. The investment wouldn't go there. The fear of investing in something or rejection of investing in a communities was that bias was there, and consequently, even though there may have been an effort to address the issue, without having a strong relationship between the affordable housing policies, not only at the local level but at the federal level, that promoted that inequity in the redlining that did occur, but more importantly, in how we approached supporting communities and the deliberate racism that was embedded in the policies. So I think it is critically important at this time that we do show this to our current leaders so that they are aware of the bias that occurred in our history, so that we can look for ways to really clearly identify and avoid making the same mistakes in our policies. We have recently approved the Tenant Bill of Rights at the Board of County Commission in order to address equity and discrimination in our policies. But at the same time, how we deliver it is still a challenge for many individuals, landlords and tenants, because the process has become something that is difficult for people to manage. So we have to really look at those opportunities in developing policies that address these issues. And I truly appreciate the work that you've done here. I look forward to utilizing it in our equity work, because I'm not one to reinvent the wheel. I love the fact that you've got this history for us to work with to start our process at the county-wide level. So thank you very, 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 very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Ms. Williams, you're recognized. You've got to unmute. Ms. Williams, you're muted.
Right, it's not, okay.
Now we
Someone
can hear
unmuted
you.
me. Thank you, someone unmuted me. I just want to start with the fact that this plan was even discussed and shared. And Commissioner Kemp, I know you were part of this initially, and for me, it was overwhelming to hear the dates and how close to the time it is now, and these things we're still happening. And so I just am very, very appreciative and grateful that the message is there and the information is available. And my goal is, anytime I know something, then I'm expected to do a better job as a result of knowing that. But I just want to give credit to Beth and yourself, Commissioner, because this we could have not talked about this for another few years and not admitted what's happened, no matter who was involved in it. And so I just feel the incredible appreciation for this message and for the awareness and education on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you recognized Beth, because Beth, it's just, I think, a lot of leadership that you've put this together, and I really appreciate it, because I think it's not just, we're the MPO, we've been focused on the highways, but the land that the highways rest on, we've been talking about the intersection of land use and our roadways, our transportation system, and wanting this to become more of that. And this gives us that history that I think I just don't think you can proceed forward without it. I really just, and we're bound to repeat our history. I think that's more what several of those who have commented, if we don't know and understand our history and understand what we've done. And it's a really powerful story to understand that this all didn't happen by happenstance. It was actually a very deliberate policy, both in housing, and I was always shocked by reading or understanding the national highway documents at the time. It wasn't just happenstance that they placed the roads where they did. They were actually aimed and directed at Black, and in the case of Tampa, what we call Latin Hispanic neighborhoods here, and that it was very intentionally directed that way. And so this was just, I think, so profound and informative, and I think it will guide us in many ways and set a direction maybe for the future that we can understand more. I did want to say to you all, because it triggered or made me think about, I've finished reading the book Cast recently, which is an incredible book, Isabel Wilkerson, but it mentions Tampa in this book. It has a few pages about the Tampa trolley system, believe it or not, because it says that there was a time when they were segregating the trolley system, but they didn't know the status of Hispanics or Latins, as she says we call, and as we know we call here, the Latin community, whether they would be subject to segregation on the trolley as well as Blacks or not. And there was this long period of, I don't know, maybe a year, where someone somewhere was deciding whether they would be considered Blacks in their seating or whether they would be considered part of the white community. And there was all this angst, and eventually they were considered to be white, and they were set allowed to sit in the sections of the trolley that were white. So I just wanted to, since y'all are, I just think it's totally, part of what was presented here, and just I wanted you to be aware of that, because it's when I read it, I was like, Tampa's in this book, wow, specifically. But at any rate, this is just very powerful. I don't see at this point anyone. Oh, Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. And of course, I also am deeply moved by the presentation, and appreciate all of staff, MPO staff, work in this direction. And Mr. Barber, in particular, he serves us very well on the Transportation Disadvantaged Committee, which I chair, and we are doing good work there as well. The presentation was awesome, and I agree with everyone that is saying we need to bring this to wider audiences. Now you've done this work, it needs to be shared more broadly. The history lessons are important. They are especially meaningful to me. My family goes back 5 generations in the Cuban side of the Ybor City part of this. My grandmother's ancestral home was demolished in one of those interstate building projects. And those lessons, as has been said, it's important not to, it's important to learn those so we don't keep repeating the mistakes of the past. But it is also important, as you pointed towards, Mr. Barber, understanding and recognition of the lingering impacts. I mean, this is not all just like in the past. And as Councilman Maniscalco said, we are today making decisions and directing policy that deals with which fork in the road we are going to take today from those policies, but also recognizing the what our responsibility is with the economic impacts as well as other impacts, health impacts of the segments of our population, particularly people of color that have been discriminated against. And things like our county commission's recent action to declare racism a public health crisis, as so many communities are doing across the nation, to help us get at those policies. And as Commissioner Overman mentioned, the recent Tenant Bill of Rights we passed has racial justice implications, given that the low-income holders of housing vouchers are 2/3 Black in our community. And so some of that was thinly veiled racism, as you are pointing to in the practices of the past. I'm proud of us for looking for ways that we can continue moving forward. I am also smiling today to see that we are getting such a frank presentation from Mr. Barber, and I expect a great presentation from Ms. Lazarus coming next, who herself was recently, not in the not too distant past, prevented from speaking about systemic institutional racism in our county structures and systems like TB Next and TBX. And she was literally prevented from speaking at a public meeting about the kinds of issues that we are so frankly discussing today. And that brings me much much comfort and pride. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And with that, I think we don't want to have too little time. Hope maybe we can even continue this on in the next month. But at any rate, I'll let Ms. Alden introduce Ms. Lazarus.
I'll go ahead and let Dana speak. She has some great material to share with you. Hopefully you can see her slides.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dana Lazarus. I am a project planner working with Joshua on the non-discrimination plan, primarily on the community engagement piece of plan development. So Josh's presentation talked about what was. Now we want to talk about what is and what's next, how we are going to proceed and do better. So my presentation is a preview into the methods that our non-discrimination team is using to take our non-discrimination plan to the next level and address some of the issues created by policy in the past. So to that end, I'm first going to go over some of our updated maps and mapping methods. Beth, next slide, please. So let's start out with this beautiful map of the location of races throughout Hillsborough County today. Note, this is a dot density map, which I'll explain in a moment. So this map is showing you the location of where different races live in the county. As you can see, we are still a very segregated county. It reminds me of a phrase that got me into urban planning in the first place, which is that racism is built into the land. As you can see here, East Tampa is primarily Black. We have a lot of Hispanics that moved out into the town and country area. Waimama, very Hispanic. The map speaks for itself. The patterns of land, of where people have lived and settled, are a result of everything that Josh talked about. Next slide. And also, as a result of these settlement patterns and migration patterns, and where planning and policy has pushed people around the county in the past, there are tangible inequitable outcomes that our citizenry are experiencing. You can see here, the poverty gap is very apparent when we look at the data. The home ownership gap is apparent when we look at the data. And looking at transportation to work, 1.8% of white people walk or take public transit, as opposed to 4.8% of Black people in the county. Next slide. So I want to talk about the methods that we're using in our non-discrimination plan to understand what we're looking at here today. So federal code requires FHWA recipients to collect statistical data on race, ethnicity, etc., and those affected by its decisions. We're thereby required to create demographic profiles of the county and identify locations of environmental justice populations. So this year we've taken a fresh look at our mapping process. We're using two different methodologies to paint a picture of the socio-demographic profile of the county. So one methodology we're using is called dot density. This kind of map shows the actual number of persons of that group, which better reflects the density of that demographic in the county overall. It helps address some shortcomings in the threshold methodology, which I'll talk about next. So in these maps, one dot equals 10 actual people. So this gives us a good understanding of the actual density of people in an area. Next slide. This is the traditional approach, and we also have created some of these maps. This is the threshold approach. So it's our traditional approach to mapping. It has its pros and cons. Visually, it's not as accurate as dot density, but for planners, it's useful for us when we want to understand the proximity of vulnerable populations near a specific corridor. This visual was also more useful for me in doing public outreach because I was able to prioritize outreach based on the threshold. So the threshold approach looks at if a block group is over a certain threshold of the population, I'll explain that in the next slide, but in this case, we've identified block groups based on the percentage of a specific socioeconomic demographic within the total population in that block group, and how it compares to the average percentage of all block groups in the county. It's kind of confusing, but just want to make sure you know our methodology. So next slide, please. We basically look at all of the block groups in the county and rank them from highest to lowest by percentage and cut them into fifths. So, for example, between 25% to 44% is considered, or the 20th percentile is very low, and that is a block group that has 25% of white people alone. Whereas in the 100th percentile for white people alone, that would be a block group of 100% white people. So it's useful for us to, again, see kind of the overall percentage of a certain block group that is made up of a certain race. Next slide. We've also created intersection maps, again, to help us prioritize our outreach and our understanding of where underserved populations lived or live today. This is particularly helpful for compliance with Executive Order 12898 on environmental justice, which requires us to identify and address the disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects on minority and low-income populations. So we look at that intersection of minority and low-income populations. Next slide, please. Because I really want to get to talking about the community engagement aspect, which is what I was hired on to help with. So next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, I was brought onto the non-discrimination team because of my experience. Well, actually, maybe I didn't mention this earlier, but I have a background in grassroots community organizing. I was hired on to help Plan Hillsborough carry out an engagement process for the non-discrimination plan with underserved communities. Our operational definition of equity that we came up with in the first task of our non-discrimination plan update recognizes that community leadership and democratic participation is key to unlocking equitable outcomes through our work. So this engagement effort that we're doing will also help us satisfy the requirements of Title VI and for the FHWA to collect and analyze data on communities of concern. One phrase that we hear a lot in community organizing is that we must center those who are most affected by our work. Who better to lead on the policy of the future than those who are in the trenches experiencing the inequity? So the driving purpose of our public engagement effort is twofold. It's to listen and to build trust. So we will be, we are listening for the immediate purpose of creating recommendations that will go into the non-discrimination plan, and we're building trust in order to build relationships for the long term. We don't want this to be just a one and done. Too often, planners go into communities to listen and then just disappear. Next slide. And we have three engagement efforts, we split our engagement effort into three parts: early engagement, active engagement, and ongoing engagement. We knew we wanted to do specific engagement activities like a survey and field outreach. In the early engagement phase, we need to look at those who need to be at the table and how we're bringing them to the table. So we created contact lists, a website, and branding, so you can see our project page at planhillsborough.org. and people can sign up if they're interested in this effort. The active engagement phase is about 5 months, and this is the part where we're talking to people and we're listening to people, and we're almost at the end of it now with our focus groups. And then we've also built in an ongoing engagement phase to make sure, again, that we don't just go into the community and disappear, where we want to make sure that we bring people back, show them the plan, and carry out their recommendations. So I'm going to talk about what we're doing for our active engagement phase. Next slide, please. Next. So first we put together a survey. The survey serves several purposes. To put it out there into the world that we're doing this project and get our branding out there, we created a logo, the Planning for Equity logo, and to, again, capture contact information of people that are interested in this effort, but also to collect quantitative data. So we will analyze trends presented by that quantitative data and use those trends to guide questions in our follow-up focus groups to dig deeper into the root causes of those trends and identify solutions to challenges. So the quantitative data will help us create recommendations as well. Next slide. I'm also very proud of our field outreach process. So in order to really reach the most underserved people who don't follow us on social media, who don't go to neighborhood meetings, and who do live in these underserved communities, according to US Census data, we devised a field outreach plan. So we identified these, again, using the threshold mapping approach, these communities that sit at the intersection of high concentrations of poverty and race, Hispanic and Black race and ethnicity. And we had a small team of field outreach people. We were wearing full PPE, and we went out and we administered the surveys verbally. That was the honestly only way to ensure participation of the most underserved people in our community. We went out 3 days a week, 5 hours a day for 7 weeks. We had a member of the team who spoke fluent Spanish, a member of the team who is from an underserved community, and we had a goal of collecting a total of 50 surveys. We blew that out of the water. We collected 200 surveys through our field outreach effort. Next slide. And again, this was really important that we did this field outreach in this way because we needed to meet people where they're at. Face-to-face is the best way to engage and form new relationships. Again, we did oversample. We were able to oversample people of low income and people of color. Next slide. We also did a storytelling forum, which was open to the public to ensure that anybody who wanted to give feedback could, to provide their personal stories, to provide information on challenges that they're facing today and potential solutions. We called it a storytelling forum because people's personal stories are really important to understanding, again, these root causes and the challenges that real people are facing today, and put a face to the problem. It was great. We had great community partners, the CDC of Tampa, Metro Inclusive Health, and the Waimama CDC as well. And so we collected data from people that came, narrative data. Next slide. And right now we're almost done with our focus group effort. So this was kind of a building, the focus groups, the purpose of the focus groups is to bring together these underserved demographics and learn specific challenges from just these folks. We found these folks through our field outreach effort and our survey effort. So we were able to identify people who generally don't have their voices heard. We have 5 focus groups, one for the Black African American community, one for the LGBTQ community, one for people with disabilities, one for the low-income community, and one for the Latinx Hispanic community. Again, some of the questions we asked came out of the trends and the data from the survey, the quantitative piece, to really make sure that we were addressing people's real issues in the questions, and really drill down into those trends. Again, identifying root causes and potential solutions. Next slide. So from this outreach effort, in addition to, again, the research that we're doing, we are going to have a chapter of recommendations in the non-discrimination plan. The non-discrimination plan is covering both the MPO and the Planning Commission, so we'll have both transportation and land use, and housing recommendations for policy, as well as procedure and procedures of how we do planning. So some of these recommendations can look like using environmental justice areas to prioritize TIP projects, for example. That might be a policy recommendation that comes out of this effort. Maybe something like, increasing the materials that we provide in Spanish, or having more, Hispanic people on staff, things like that. So here's a list of some of those recommendations that could come out of this effort. We really want to identify policies that reverse those racist policies of the past and inequitable policies of the past. Next slide. And that concludes my, as quickly as I can, get through that presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have only a couple of minutes left, and I know that this is yeah, I saw the cheers, and we all, I think both these presentations just really inspired us today. And I would say that we maybe can have part 2 at the policy committee, and in the future, Ms. Alden and Ms. Lazarus, and with the first presentation by Mr. Barber. It is just a powerful, this was an incredible meeting, I think, and we can look forward to continuing this conversation, because I want to just move to our regular MPO meeting in just a couple minutes. But it was really great work, excellent work, and we have much to move to in the future.
If I could just add, I think we've heard loud and clear from your conversation this morning that our history has to inform where we go next as an organization and as a community, and how do we turn these trends around. I want to thank Dina and Joshua so much for all the long hours that they put into this, and I want to acknowledge we had 2 more board members join us during the course of this presentation, Councilperson Citro and Councilperson Donahue. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us this morning.
That's excellent, and I think many more of us will see this again, and we'll have many more people seeing the entire presentation. It's very, very powerful. So with that, I'm just going to say old and new business, but I'm going to just say you're going to have to save it for next month. and we have our plate full right now, and we will move on to the meeting. We're going to adjourn quickly, give people just a couple minutes of a break before we move to the regular MPO.
Dana, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was amazing. I can't wait to sit down with you and just get it all together. So I really appreciate your work. And yes, I was in the audience when you got drug out. So